Well, it's not just Putin they're talking about in this election. Women voters have also been a central focus. And according to a new poll, the political bickering may be taking a toll on our personal lives. Cosmopolitan magazine surveyed women between the ages of 18 to 34. More than 1,000 of them were surveyed, and 42% of these women say that the election has negatively impacted their relationships. Joining me now to discuss this is editor of Cosmopolitan.com, Amy Odell, along with conservative commentator Ashley Pratte in Washington. Okay, Amy, I want to turn to this. So 42% of these women say it's affecting their personal life. What else did you learn from them?
That's absolutely right. And, I think that the answer to this question really shows just how polarizing and divisive this election has been. And what many of our readers said is that they come from families who have always voted for Republicans. Over the course of their entire lives, their parents have voted for Republicans. And in this election, they themselves have chosen not to vote for a Republican. They're voting for Hillary Clinton or a third-party candidate. And it makes them question the others in their family who are still voting for a Republican, because many of them don't understand, given the conversation around Donald Trump and his treatment of women, how their family members can still be voting for Donald Trump. And that is very, very stressful for our readers. We also heard many of them say, I am voting for Donald Trump and I feel like I'm being vilified for my choice, because so many young women who I know and so many people in my family are asking me how I can make that choice.
Ashley, it's a good point, though. We've seen the statistics that Republican women are really struggling in this election. What are you seeing?
I'm definitely one of them. I'm a 27-year-old millennial Republican. I've identified that way as long as I have been able to vote. And this election has been deeply troubling in a lot of ways, because we had so much promise going into the bench of 2016 when you looked at the potential candidates, and we ended up with a standard bearer of the party who does not represent a lot of specifically young women, but in particular, a lot of the values of the Republican Party. And I think that's what's most troubling here, is he's now become the standard bearer, and he doesn't represent, at least to me, what the party used to represent. So there needs to be a big rebuild here if the GOP wants to keep female voters, specifically young female voters like myself, in their camp. And I think that is honestly going to be their biggest problem moving forward, because of the rhetoric that's been used this whole campaign. Now, I've been one to say for years that Democrats, I feel, pander to women, but it's always been Republicans who can't seem to message, and this year is no exception. If anything, it's been 10 times worse. To me, Republicans and conservative values means the empowerment of women and of all people, and that's not what we're seeing this year.
Ashley, I want to ask you about that Access Hollywood tape. 81% of women who were surveyed just weren't satisfied with his remarks and the apology after that, or the lack of apology for some people. What do you make light of this, that he was actually making light of this serious situation? There's 3 weeks to go with this election. Can Donald Trump win over women?
I don't think so. There's been one consistent trend here, Rena, and that's the fact that Donald Trump has never polled well with women. And even within his own party, its numbers have been going down. So I think he was at one point at 84% among Republican women. It's now down to about 76%. So you see that number slipping. Among women in general, Hillary leads him, I believe, by 20 points among women. So I think that has been a real problem throughout this entire campaign. So with 3 weeks left to go, he's just pandering to his own base right now, which, again, I don't really recognize that base of the party anymore, but he's not bridging out to new voters. He's not trying to bring women into the fold. If anything, he's doubled down on the rhetoric, coming out and saying that these women who have made allegations against him, they weren't his first choice. That was, I think at that point, a lot of people realized he wasn't genuinely sorry for any of the things that he has said, and he just continues to say things because guess what? He's been part of the entertainment industry, not someone who really should be running for president of the United States.
Amy, what's so fascinating was at the beginning of this election cycle, we saw that millennial women were saying, we're not just going to sign up for Hillary Clinton because she's a woman. That's just not how we're going to roll. How does this affect this election, younger women voters, some who are voting for the first time?
It's an incredibly stressful election. I almost hate to say it for many of our readers. We asked them their predominant feeling going into this election, and it was an open-ended question. And the most common responses we got were fearful and embarrassed. Mm-hmm. They are afraid of the consequences of what they perceive to be the wrong candidate getting into office, and they feel embarrassed by how they are seeing the political process unfold. That said, we do hear from many young women who do feel really excited about the prospect of, in their first election, voting for the very first time, being able to vote for a female candidate who could be the very first female president in our nation's history.
It's also so fascinating. We've seen that this election might have the largest voter turnout of single women. Ashley, how is that going to impact this election, particularly with the Republican Party? And when you talk about women, does the Republican Party need to rethink their approach to women after this election in particular?
They definitely do. It's been something that we've been saying for years, Rena, that we needed to be more inclusive. We were a big tent party. We were a younger party. We had all of these futuristic ideals. We promoted free markets, all these things that resonated with young women like myself, which we are no longer talking about because we've steered so far away from the messaging and from the party's platform. So I think here what we really need to do again is rebuild and restructure the party and really have a deep look at this and realize that Donald Trump can't be the standard bearer for the party. How do we rebuild after this? How do we do damage control? Because the GOP, again, is in desperate times if they lose young Republicans, but specifically young female Republicans, because it's always been the stereotype, right, that Republicans don't like women, the war on women. It's been something used against Republicans for years, and this year, again, is no exception. If anything, it's gotten 10 times worse. And one thing I do want to point out, the Democratic primary was so divisive, right, between Sanders and Clinton, and there were a lot of young people and, you know, that whole millennial age range that we've been talking about this whole segment, who were so in support of Bernie Sanders, who couldn't fathom the idea of voting for Clinton, that have now completely reversed that and said, you know what, I don't care, you know, about anything she's done. I'm going to vote for her because I have to stop Trump. And I think that that is something really critical here. So when it comes out to young women, specifically young people turning out, they will come out in droves for her in the same way I think that they did for Obama. But I think at the same time, it's been less enthusiastic.
Okay, Ashley Pratte, Amy Odell, thank you, ladies, for joining us.